All right, before we move on to the spatial portion, I did have one other thing I wanted to insert. Just the other day, my wife asked me, what has been the peak hospitalizations and the peak number of cases and the peak deaths throughout the United States for each state? So in other words, when did a particular state have its peak for those different characteristics? And I thought, that's a great question. We can figure that out with SQL. So here's a short little query that I've created to kind of show how we start doing this. And I wanted to do it only for two states, Florida and Maryland, because I'm a little bit familiar with those two states. And we've done this before where we got weekly averages. So let's dive into the middle of this. Actually, before we do that, let's dive into where we're getting the data from. Well, we're using daily. That's the table we've been using all along that has the daily cases, hospitalizations, and so many other deaths and so many other fields. And I'm using daily again, but now I'm calling it D2. In other words, I'm tricking the SQL engine into thinking there are two tables, one called D1, one called D2, but they're really the same table. And we do have the increase in deaths for a particular day. So how many deaths occurred on that day, or how much did it increase from the previous day? So I'm going to get the average of that. And again, because we're using SQLite, we have to cast that as a float because the data came in as text. Okay, but the other thing I'm trying to do, remember, average is an aggregate clause, so I need multiple values. So I'm looking for an example where, how do I get multiple values together? Well, one of the ways I do that is I can look at the Julian day of a particular date, and then I can subtract the Julian day from the other table, which again is itself. But I'm saying when the absolute value of that Julian day is less than 4, those are the groups of dates that I want. So let's look, for example, I've got a date here of July 30th in Florida. And if I subtract July 30th from July 31st, or July 31st from July 30th, I get a -1. Well, the absolute value of that is less than 4. I can do the same for this date and this date, and so some of the different dates we can do it for. These dates are not in order. Why don't we just do that right now? Let's say select state DT from daily, where state is equal to FL, and then order by DT descending. Just real quick, do that. Okay, so let's do that again. So here's September 20th, and when I subtract 19 from that, that's 1, that's 2, 3, and 4. So that won't count. So these 3 are the ones that count. Then if I subtract 21, I get -1, -2, -3, -4. But remember, we're using the absolute value. So what that will do for us is give us the number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we include 1, 2, and 3. So what we're getting is we're getting 3 days on each side of every day. And 0, of course, is that particular day. So where that's true, I'm going to get the average of the death increases. So in fact, that gives me the 7-day average of the increase in deaths. And again, I'm ordering it by the state name and the average death. We'll run this. And here we go. So for Florida, it's saying there was an average of 184 deaths on August 2nd. That is the largest amount of death over a 7-day period. Well, I'm back in the worldometer, and I'm looking at the deaths in Florida, and you can see how it goes up and down. I've clicked on the 7-day average, and if you come in here, right, 184, they have August 5th, so they're calculating it slightly different. I've got a 3-day difference, but again, 184 is that number. I'm now in Maryland, so let's scroll down to the deaths. So again, we can click on the 7-day average, and yeah, right about here-ish, right, 61 deaths around April 26th. And I scroll down, and around April 27th, so off by 1 day, 56 deaths, so not quite the same number. So there's a little bit of differences here, but only by a few. But we're getting the correct date put together. But what this is doing is it's giving me all the dates for these two states. I don't really want that. What I want instead is to wrap that first query that we just wrote together, and then I'm going to grab the average death, or I'm going to call that peak death. We'll just say as, and I'm going to group it by the state. So let's run this again. And that's done. So here's our 184, here's our 56, and our April 27th, and our August 2nd. So this is telling me the peak death of a 7-day average for Florida and Maryland. The next thing we can do, of course, is just comment out this one part of the query where I'm looking at just Florida and Maryland, and then we can do it for the entire country. So Alaska had its peak around August 2nd, and it was 10 deaths. Let's look at Colorado. April 26th had 39 deaths. And here I am looking at the deaths in Colorado on Worldometer, and here you go. Around April 24th, around 40 deaths. And here I have April 26th, about 40 deaths. So this now is a table of all the peak deaths and the date in which that state hit its peak. Of course, the other thing we can do is sort this by the actual date, and then what we can do is, and let's do that, group by that, order by DT, and let's do it as ascending. There we go. So you can see who had the earliest. So Washington State had the earliest peak, and Wisconsin next, Michigan, then New York hit its peak on April 11th, and you can see the average number of deaths on that day. And this tells a little bit of a story as to how COVID spread. Now, it's hard for me to get my head around all these numbers, of course, so the next thing we'll want to do is bring this into a spatial look, so I can actually see a map that shows me the progression of when these states hit their peak. And that's where we're going to go next. So our next section, we're going to dive into the spatial part of COVID analysis using SQLite. So if you're enjoying these videos, please consider hitting like and also subscribing to the channel, because as I continue to release new videos, you'll be the first to know about it, and you can start applying this with your own data. Also, consider going to my site, artlembo.com, online courses, and you can see all the different courses I have. So I'm going to have courses on statistical analysis and on using spatial SQL. And of course, under my books, you can get how do I do that in SQLite. So you'll learn how to do all the SQL queries in addition to following along with the videos. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you as we start to integrate some of the spatial aspects into the analysis of COVID-19 with SQL.